Yeah, sorry, we need more drinks or anything? Okay? Excellent, excellent, okay. Let's start the shir with the l'chaim, like all Scottish shirim. Actually, Scottish shirim we start, middle, and end with the l'chaim. Anybody want the l'chaim? No? Chaim. Right? Okay, so that you might have been a bit confused about the title. Emunas Chachomim, certainties and doubt. Did you get that? Emunas Chachomim, certainty and doubt. A number of years ago, I was invited to speak at a Shabbaton in a small town somewhere in the east coast of America, whose name I will not mention. This is good. Last week I wouldn't tell you about the story, and all very discreet. The name Y.Y. Rubenstein is synonymous with tact and diplomacy. Anyway, so I was invited by a certain Rosh Kollel to a certain town, and when I got there, it turned out he told me that he tried to get together. There's two Orthodox shuls in the town. He was the Rav of one of them and the Rosh Kollel, and there's another which is like a modern Orthodox Mizrahi. He wanted to get together for a joint Shalashudas. So I was the guest of the one, but we'll get together. However, when he suggested it to them, there was a huge explosion of opposition and controversy that Y.Y. Rubenstein was being brought as the guest speaker at the Shabbaton. Now this totally baffled me, because I'd never been in this town in my life before, and there was a certain doctor, it turns out, who spends his whole time, or most of his time, or too much of his time, on the internet, looking at all the sites, and sadly there are lots and lots of them, which like to expose all the wrongdoings and all the shortcomings of the Haredi community. Not that I appear, as far as I know, in any of these sites, but it, as it were, had poisoned his mindset. And he was particularly upset, he explained to the Rosh Kollel, because of something I'd written in one of my books. So I wrote a book called On the Derech, Answers to Questions That Challenge Jewish Minds. Which you have. Good, excellent. I'm trying to reprint at the moment, actually. I have to reprint two of my books at the moment. Anyway, so in it there's a chapter called Don't Go Down and Make Mistakes Like the Rest of Us. And this fellow was an endocrinologist, and he said to the Rosh Kollel, I am furious, and I'm an endocrinologist, and somebody told me that people who've got diabetes, that insulin doesn't help them with diabetes. I wouldn't be interested in anything else he has to say. And anybody that says that go down and don't make mistakes, not interested in anything else he has to say. The Rosh Kollel said, have you read his book? No. Have you read that chapter? No. But he'd read the last paragraph. It's actually pathetic. It's really very sad. And anybody that said... Now, if you'd read the beginning of the paragraph, or of the chapter, I make it quite clear that infallibility is not a position that the Torah takes about anybody. We do not believe, or as Shlomo HaMelech, who we believe was quite clever, put it inside of Ba'or Sheyasa Tov Lo Yechta. We don't say that people don't make mistakes. We say that even Moshe Rabbeinu, hitting the rock, made a mistake, and arguably on a couple of other occasions as well, according to the Meforshim. We don't say that. This fellow had not read what I'd said. I don't know why he went off at this crazy tangent, but again, if you hear the background, then maybe that's his mindset. The fellow who was sponsoring me coming and paying my speaking fee was a very old fellow, delightful chap, who just recovered from cancer. So he's home after, fighting cancer, and this was his gift to the Kehillah, to say thank you to Hashem, that he's going to bring a scholar in residence to a Torah a weekend. Him and two other guys actually went to this poor guy to try and persuade him to withdraw the funding for the weekend because of something that I didn't say in the book, which he hadn't bothered reading. Yeah. So Taka, what does it say? Inside of Ba'or Sheyasa Tov Lo Yechta, which is our position, means that everybody makes mistakes. If that means everybody, that means, as we said, Moshe Rabbeinu as well. The Satmar Rov, he says something which is, I think, extremely brilliant. He's medayik the posuk. He looks very carefully at the wording of the posuk. In Sadik Ba'oretz Sheyasa Tov Lo Yechta. should have not just said, in tzaddik, she has a toy v'lo yechta? No such thing as a tzaddik doesn't make a mistake. But he says, in tzaddik, Shlomo Melech says, in tzaddik ba'oretz. So the Divrei Yoel, who certainly, of course, spent a lot of time dealing with people, said that if you're dealing with people, even if you get it right, people will say you get it wrong. People will believe you got it wrong. If you've ever, I don't want to go off too much of this tangent. This will get me in one of my hobby horses. But you know the famous story of the Chasam Sofer. The people used to come to see the Chasam Sofer to ask for advice. I think it was the Chasam Sofer, and he had a little bowl. Oh, we got a little bowl of cashew nuts there. But he had a bowl of pebbles. And he would say to, let's say it's the couple, he was doing marriage guidance, counselling, whatever it was, yes, I'll help you. But could you just take a couple of those pebbles, please, each of you, and throw them at me? So, please just take some stones and throw them at me. I'd rather you threw the stones at me before I helped you than afterwards. And if you've ever been involved in this, in arbitration, funnily enough, the story I didn't tell you last week, after it was off camera, I did, of course, but when we were in the court with this fellow, before it goes to trial, then they try and have an arbitrator, settle the thing. And if you've ever done arbitration, then you're trying to be honestly in the middle. But inevitably, people are going to be very angry with you, particularly if you come out one side rather than the other.
A good compromise leaves everyone unhappy.
And as my legal friend to the left here says, a good compromise leaves everybody unhappy. So the Satmar Rov says that if you're ba'oretz, even if you're a tzaddik, people will think you've made a mistake. Where do we get this? So that's why the title is Emunas Chachomim, certainty and doubt. If we assume the Gedolim can make mistakes, do make mistakes, inside of ours, everybody makes mistakes, then you could conceive of when a tzaddik is dealing with you, or a Rav or a Chacham is dealing with you, particularly if he finds that you are not correct. Well, my late wife and I only once had to, in our 26 years of marriage, I only once had to go and ask for advice. If that implies that my current wife and I have gone more than once, that's true, because the second marriage is, of course, by definition, much more difficult than the first marriage. Saying I'm on that tangent, I will continue. There is, I give a share again somewhere in the East Coast, usually about once a month. This is a Frumer share. I don't know if I've told you this story. I met once in one of my Shabbatons, it was actually Sukkot, over a Sukkot, a very exceptional person whom I liked a lot. Banker, successful, divorced sadly, a couple of kids, spoke with 5-6 different languages, but I liked him a lot. We got on very well. He came to another couple of my events, followed me about for a while, and he was very keen to get remarried, and I was trying to help him, but he found somebody to remarry. Unfortunately, he was very keen for me to come to the Chastam. Unfortunately, my youngest daughter was getting married at the same time. Of course, that had to come first. And to raise money for the wedding, I was speaking in Europe, Gibraltar, France, and various other places. To cut a long story short, I was out the States for about 10 weeks, or maybe even 3 months, I can't remember. I came back, and I hadn't seen him for 3 months. He got married. And 3 months later, or maybe even 4, I was giving that same shir, my sort of monthly shir. And I walked in, he was a very good-looking, handsome fellow. He was very smart, very geschickt. And there he was sitting there. Normally, when I asked, I was giving a shir, he's on the ball, if I couldn't remember Gemara, he'd tell him the Gemara is, if it's always in a Taisus, contradict you. And he was very smart, and there he was sitting in the front, instead of like this, as he normally was in position. He put on a ton of weight, and he looked as though he was carrying the world on his shoulders. And so basically, he came up to me afterwards and he said, "How long have you been remarried?" I said, "I think it was 10 years in those days, 5 years ago." He said, "I think you're a tzaddik." And so I smiled and I said, "Tell me, are you by any chance struggling with this?" And he went, "Dong." I said, "And are you having difficulty with that?" And he went, "Ding." And I went through about 4 or 5 things, and he looked at me as though it was one of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, or Tzaddik, this, that sort of thing, which, by the way. But never mind. So I said, the Gemara says that Kashan is a show all them Kriyas Yamsuf. For Hashem to make a shidduch is difficult for Kriyas Yamsuf. Yeah, of course. I said, the Gemara is talking about second marriages. He said, I've learned that Gemara. I didn't know that was Pshat. I said, I also learned that Gemara. I also didn't know that was Pshat, but that's the Pshat. And I looked as though I just stuck another 10 tons in his shoulder. I said, no, you're not listening. The Lashon is, it's as difficult for Hashem to make a shidduch, a second shidduch, as it is for him to do Kriyas Yamsuf. But we did Kriyas Yamsuf. We did Kriyas, and we got to the other side. All that was necessary was us to find somebody who knew how to get us to the other side and follow faithfully in his footsteps, and then you get to the other side. And I said, as you can see, I've got a little bit of experience in this. I'll be very happy to help you. Baruch Hashem. Happily married. But, second marriage is more difficult. But the first marriage, only once went to see a Rav, was my Rav, the Getzed Rav. And the Getzed Rav, because he was my Rav, if he told me to, walk through walls, I would walk through walls. Many times he gave me advice to do things which struck me as crazy. But I had Emunas Chachomim. I certainly had Emunah in my Rav, and he told me to do it. And, I assumed he knew stuff that I didn't know. It all worked out very, very nicely. So once my wife and I had a disagreement, I think it was something over chinuch for our children, and we just, it wasn't acrimonious, we just couldn't agree. So let's go and speak to the Rav. So he listened carefully to both our arguments, and then he looked and he said, I hear what you say, but on this occasion, I think you should do what your wife says. It was gewaldig. No, my male pride was not hurt here. I wasn't giving in. Male and Scottish. Don't give in. I was doing what the Rav said. And then it's an easier thing to achieve. But generally when, the Rav says, you're wrong, there's a reaction against this. Anyway, so basically, if you've ever arbitrated, people are going to say you're wrong. Where do we get this idea from? Well, it's all over Shas, but certainly in Shaiftim, the Seder of Shaiftim, there's a wonderful Rashi here, and it's in Yud Zayin Pasuk Tes. So Vasa el Kohanim, and you will come to the Kohanim. Welcome. We have a chair. We have chairs. We have whiskey. Why should you pass me that red stuff, the blood? Oh, that's right. Yeah. And that little cup. I'm going a bit thirsty here. Thanks so much. Gosh, we don't normally get as many as 50. Oh, that was good. Oh, well done. See, that's what happens when you make a joke. This means my wife, I think we're going to have to go and see an arbitration here. There's going to be seriously in trouble. Moshe, I'm so sorry you spilled that, don't worry. It's a shaky table. Yeah. So, Posites, Vasa Lukanim, come to the Kohanim, a Levim, a Shofet, a Sher, Yeba Yama Mehim, come to the Shoftim, the Kohanim, and Shoftim, and Levim that are going to be in those days. But the Rashtra, and if you're not sure what to do, so that's the lead into this Posuk, then you go and they'll tell you what to do. Rashi says an astonishingly interesting thing. Even if the Shoftim, even the Chachamim are not, you must have heard this said a million times. I've heard it. In fact, Taka, maybe I should just make it quite clear. If I was the Sultan, and if you speak to my mother-in-law, I'm sure she would have a view on that. But if I was the Sultan and I wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael, the best way to do so is to undermine the relationship that we have with our Chachamim, with our Gedolim. And Rashi seems to address this here. Why does the Torah say B'yama Mehim? Says Rashi, even if he was, it's the case that the Gedolim of your generation are not as great as the Vilna Gaon or the Chasam Sofer or whoever it was, you still have to go and listen to him. And Rashi says, and I can almost see the smile. It's not somebody's bed. And when Rashi wrote this, I can see a little smiley face. Nar, fool, you have a choice. Where else are you going to go to? Except the Shoftim in your days. Oh, maybe the ones before, they were so much greater. Yeah, well, maybe their people were so much greater than you. And that's the whole idea of the Uridas Doris. Moshe Rabbeinu was there, but they were the Dordea. So if you go down, then of course our Gedolim can't compare to Moshe Rabbeinu. But the space that separates the Dordea to Moshe Rabbeinu is the same as the space that separated the generation of Rav Moshe Feinstein in America to Rav Moshe Feinstein or Rav Shmuel today, etc., etc. It's always the same. There is no website to go to, deadgedolim.com. You can type in a question, or hashtag gone Gedolim. There's no such thing. And Taki, if you think that's a joke, Simson Chachomim says that quite clearly. Rots in the Taretz. He's going to ask He's giving the answer to those who actually concede that you can go to a dead God. Oh no, that's it, no, God's gone. Yiddishkeit's finished. What rubbish! What nonsense! There is no such you've got to go to the Gedolim in your time. I remember I used to give when I was still in England, I was the official campus rabbi for the 14 universities of the northwest of England, and one of my favourite Jewish societies was Liverpool. I was in Cowlall in Liverpool for 3 years, and I spent a lot of my life teaching there. There was a fellow. I used to go on a Wednesday night, just like this, and it was a small Jewish society. There was only about 200 students there, and I used to get a very large proportion of them used to come to the shir. There was a fellow, very sweet fellow, very British, very polite, and very shy. And for 2 years, this fellow sat quietly and just listened. And after every shir, he'd come up and say, "Thank you very much," which was, very British. In the third year, which is his final year, a degree in, how long is a degree? Is it 4 years in America, a degree in college? So it's 3 years in England, 4 years in Scotland. So basically, he came up to me just out of the blue and he said, rather surprisingly, "I'd like to become frum, but I don't know how to go about it." That's not the British way of doing things. It would sort of be a gradual process. He just wants to become frum. And I said, well, the first thing to do is come for Shabbos. Now, in Manchester, north of England, if you look in the map, we are north of New York, Shabbos goes out about 10:30, 11:15 at night, which is late. I mean, Shabbos afternoons are very long. And I don't know about you, but I think we all know that the greatest cure for insomnia known to mankind is cholent. Shabbos afternoon. After cholent, there's only one thing I want to do, and that's horizontal Judaism. My kaviyas with Reb Duvi in the base of mattress, right? Just whoosh, go. And that's it's somehow in our DNA. But as you know, if you've ever worked in Kiryat Chakim, and I know a couple of the people at the table here have done exactly that, if you invite somebody for the first Shabbos, non-frum people, Saturday is do stuff day. It's basketball, or it's football, or it's baseball, or it's go to the mall, or it's skiing, or blah, blah, blah. They're doing everything, and their genes are all going right, whereas you and I go. And I had to keep, and it was a long day, a very long day, so I had to keep him amused. Would you like to play chess? Was my first thing. Yes, because he was sitting there, he was always joking. Yeah, to cut a long story short, we got through the Shabbos. I don't know how I got through the Shabbos, and he finished, went to London, spent a year in a place called Golders Green, and then he went off to yeshiva. He went off to Or Sameach, spent a couple of years in Or Sameach, and went somewhere else, another yeshiva, not a good yeshiva. And that was that. And then he sent me an invitation and a picture of him and his Kala, very beautiful, such a smiley couple. And then I couldn't get to Israel for the wedding, but then he carried on in yeshiva, and then he sent me a picture of him and his wife and the little baby, and then the next little bit, it was absolutely gorgeous. Eventually he came back, he was working in London. I'm working in Chinuch, he was a teacher in the school. And I was saying Shirim in London, as I will be, not this Shabbos, but next. And he wanted to come and see me. Lovely, my ex-Talmud. And he came in where I was staying, with family in London. And he came through the door, and at this stage he didn't look like a student anymore. In fact, he looked the exact same as me. He was wearing a dark suit, like a little pays behind his ears, little beard, smart, lovely guy. Sat down, started to schmooze. And after about 15 minutes, he said, and he wants to give up. He's on the verge of giving up. And I was absolutely astonished. And obviously very upset. And I said, why? So we had a long conversation, and two things emerged which were really, really interesting. The first thing was a psychological thing more than anything. You see, when he was a Baal Tshuva, or in the process of being, just a newly arrived Baal Tshuva, then as you know, that people, what sort of people do Baal Tshuva meet at the beginning of their journey? Sorry?
People that are
Outgoing and kind. People who are interested in them. And there was a couple of families in London who, he was the star, Yanko's called Yanko. Oh, Yanko's here. And he was a Ben Bias. He was part of the family. And when he came back to London, as I said, he looked just like you or me. And nobody made a fuss of him anymore. And I know that sounds silly, but it's very hard to having been a star to suddenly be just a mundane lifestyle. He missed the fact that he was no longer a star. The other thing was, even though he'd learned in yeshiva for I think 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, he'd never really come to terms with learning. He'd never really conquered learning. And that's it's the air, or the helicopter. And that was something which was extraordinarily difficult for him. In fact, he got a little bit angry with it. What's the point of learning Gemara? I mean, he could understand halacha, but what's this whole Shakla Batarian, Hillel and Shammai, and who cares, right? But really it was an expression of his frustration because he couldn't actually do it. And I said to him, the answer is you're learning Gemara in order to think like the Gemara, to become like the Gemara. There is a beautiful expression of that in Ali Shor, in Chelik Beis. Here, Rav Shlomo Wolbe, Zechzad Ivrocha, quotes Reb Simcha Zissel. And he says the following thing: Bezmano shel Reb Simcha Zissel. So in the time of Reb Simcha Zissel, of course the founder of Kem, Paul Darwin Hayadua. That was the time of the era of Darwin, the English founder of evolution, who was of course well known. But Omer Reb Simcha Zissel. Reb Simcha Zissel said, Darwin toyin ki moitze adam hu min hakayf. Darwin's mistake, Darwin's theory, and remember it's still called the theory of evolution, but his theory and his shita was that we descend from apes. Yos la Darwin lo mekach. Said Reb Simcha Zissel, that's a very fair and appropriate conclusion for Darwin to have reached. Ki hu me'olam lo ra adam, because he'd never in his lifetime seen a human being. Very interesting. He'd never seen a human being. Ani, said Reb Simcha Zissel, Ra'isi es Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. I saw Rabbi Yisrael Salanta with my own eyes. And therefore I know ki ein moitze adam min hakayf, that humanity didn't descend from a cave. But the people, human beings, he knew, and the parallels he saw with animal behavior and human behavior, those are perfect comparisons. Of course he would come to that conclusion. But if you see a Yisrael Salanta, a Divrei Yoel, the Manchester Rosh Hashiva we were talking about last week, if you were, or any Godel, you know you're not talking about a normal human being. Really, the point of learning Gemara is to become the sort of person, to think, to behave, your attitude, etc., that reflects something which is totally beyond the mere physical. Yep. Do Gedolim make mistakes? Of course Gedolim make mistakes. There's the famous first mimer in Kodesh Mamorim of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, and he wants to know, the famous question he asks is that if it's the case that the Rambam says that the first mitzvah Rishona, is to know that God exists, and if it's a mitzvah that means something we were talking about last week, remember it's a mitzvah that means everybody's obliged to keep the mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah, then he says a 12-year-old girl or a 13-year-old boy is obliged to keep the mitzvah and to know that God exists, not to believe that God exists, but to know that God exists. And he asked the incredibly interesting question, therefore, how can it be that the Rambam who says that, it was the same Rambam who writes in Moreh Nevuchim that apart from those who had Ruach HaKodesh and Nevi'us, nobody reached an intellectual level like Aristotle. Because Aristotle didn't believe in God. So how can you expect a 12-year-old girl or a 13-year-old boy to supersede the achievements of an Aristotle? There's many other questions there.
We're assuming he was intellectually honest.
Oh. More than that. He wants to say, and as Rabbi Dessa talks about this as well, in fact, because we've got not so much time, I'm going to miss out on Rabbi Dessa. He wants to say that the truth of the matter is that basically, of course, Aristotle was a philosopher. Does anyone know what the word philosophy means? Philosophy means, right, so philos, as in Philadelphia, is a Greek, right, it means love, that's right. It's a good word for love. Philosopher. A philosopher is somebody who loves wisdom or truth. So here is Aristotle's love of truth. But Aristotle, as Chazal made clear in various stories about him, was also another philos. He was a philanderer. Philanderer, andros, in Greek means woman, and philanderer, he loved. He was a maneuval. Young woman, old woman, married woman, single woman, didn't make any difference to him at all. He was a maneuval. Incidentally, for some reason, that many philosophers were. Don't ask me why. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, had the honesty to declare himself to be a philanderer first and a philosopher only second. Interestingly, in Sefer, what's the name of the Sefer? It's gone blank. Come to a second. In the Sefer, I found that they found accounts from contemporary Sforim at the time of Aristotle that say the end of his life he became a Ger Tzedek.
Who was this? Aristotle?
Aristotle became a Ger Tzedek. He tried very much. Now the Greeks, in their accounts, say he went insane at the end of his life. But to become a Jew, from their point of view, would be the exact same thing. But it's interesting how it says it's Sefer Doros. It says there how Besof Yomov, at the end of his life, he accepted everything it says in Torah's Moshe and became a Ger Tzedek. Well, that's very interesting. It says Besof Yomov, because if his love of woman is there, his love of truth is there, then what are you going to do if, let's say, your love of wisdom and truth says that debauched lifestyle is inappropriate? So that should be the conclusion you reach. But as you point out, but are you seeing it clearly? No, because this is what you want more than anything else. So of course, your taivas will knock out your seichel. Well, what happens to a person's physical taivas when they get older? They diminish. Then the taivas diminish. Then what could predominate? Then the truth. So it would not be a surprise at the end of his life. But it's interesting that in all the court cases, and saying I was, as I told you last week, involved in a court case, the judge was very, very nice, incidentally. But, a judge is appointed generally for his legal abilities. There is no test of his morality. As long as he's not done anything criminal. But his morals, his ethics, his moral compass, that's not part of the process to being appointed to be a judge, particularly in America when it seems to be something that's voted as opposed to appointed, which is in England it's appointed by skill. But even if it's appointed by skill, it's not appointed according to your morals and your ethics. Whereas we are looking for chachomim, and our chachomim, they're tested in their midos. And a chacham's only going to emerge much later in life anyway to be a gadol. Very few gadolim are young men. Gadolim tend to be old men, and they've been tested. Their genius in Torah has been examined, re-examined, challenged a gazillion times. They write shuvas, but their personal life is under the microscope as well. So where else are you going to find the chachomim? Okay, I accept. Inside of Orishas, I'm not going to argue with Shlomo Melech. And of course, chachomim therefore make mistakes. But where else? In what other system are you going to find gadolim? As Rabbi Chana Vassman says in Kamas Mamar, where else in the world are you going to find gadolim and dayanim and shoftim like ours? Because our system demands the person who's passing judgment, giving advice, is refined. And of course, gadolim sometimes make mistakes. But something else to say here. This is Gemara in the Avodah Zarah Daf Daled on my base. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Lo'as Yisrael es ha'egel el alitin piskan peh labalit shuva. How could it be that an entire generation who reached the highest spiritual level that we can imagine went to make the egel of? Well, we all know Chazal say you can never fight against your Yetzer Hara unless Hashem Yisbarach is on your side. The Yetzer Hara is going to make mincemeat of you. He's going to squish you. You're dead. But if Hashem is on your side, so the question really then is, why didn't Hashem help them not to make the egel of? Chazal say he withdrew his support to allow those to make the egel of, to make that mistake, so that in any future generation, if you lived in a generation where you would despair that Hashem would be on our side, think back to the egel of. He wanted to wipe us out for that. That was really mega, mega bad stuff. And yet we got out of that. That was setting a precedent no matter how bad you are. And then it says, the Gemara goes on to say, well, but David Melech and Bathsheba, same thing. If you as an individual, as you or I, do things that are bad, and you despair, and you beat yourself up, and you feel bad about it, horrible about it, Well, David HaMelech did the biggest, that's the one we talked about last week, Chil Hashem. The one the Rambam says you only really get forgiven of once you've suffering in your life and you die, the good deal. And then it's all going to be forgiven. No, which, remember, Ben Yonah says, no, making a Kiddush Hashem saves you that pain. But David HaMelech's life, or his Avera, in inverted commas, was a Chil Hashem. Still talks about David and Bathsheba. The reason that Hashem withdrew his support for him and that allowed it to happen was to set a precedent so that a Yochid should never despair. So sometimes Gedolim, David HaMelech, the Dordea, Moshe Rabbeinu, whoever you want to say, will make mistakes because Hashem wants them to make mistakes for the greater good, if you like. Now, yesterday was Purim Kon, and Rabbi Dessler in Chelik Aleph of Mitzvah Midian, again, there in page 76, we're back to Reb Simcha Zissel. He asked the question of the Purim story. The essay here is because one of his Talmidim asked, why was it that the Gedolim didn't warn Klal Yisrael what was going to happen in the Second World War? If we assume that many Gedolim have Ruach HaKodesh, a reasonable assumption, then why is it that they didn't see what was coming? Well, first of all, some did, and some did warn people to leave. But again, even if... Sorry?
And some told them
to stay. But again, even Ruach HaKodesh, as the Sorim say, Ruach HaKodesh is the smallest form of connection to God. Nevi'us is the highest. Ruach HaKodesh is low. And as we were talking about Simcha Zissel and Reb Yisrael Salanter before, somebody asked Reb Simcha Zissel if Reb Yisrael Salanter had Ruach HaKodesh. He says, Pinchas ben Yair, as everybody knows, the Gemara in Yuma, that's Mesilas Sharm is based on that. It goes through all the Madrigas, the Rizas, the Hiras, etc., etc. And eventually it comes to the end to Ruach HaKodesh. So he said, whether or not Reb Yisrael Salanter said Reb Simcha Zissel had Ruach HaKodesh, I'm not going to discuss that. What I can tell you is he refined himself and went through all the process that brings you to that. So the question was asked by one of the Talmidim. Rabbi Dessler said, if it wasn't I loved you so much, I wouldn't even answer. He was obviously offended at the question. But again, that's if we say they make mistakes, and that's the title of the year. I'm just calling certainties and doubts. Now we've outlined the certainties, but what you could have a doubt over this. So this is what he says.
Was it a personal affront to Dessler for not? Was he sort of accusing of Dessler?
No, but he's certainly accusing Rabbi Dessler's teachers and Rebbeim and family. Reb Simcha Zissel was, after all, his grandfather. He was, I think, descended from his Salanter as well. But all the Gedolim, etc. So he asked the following thing. To make this work, and saying we're coming into Purim, let's do a Purim spiel. Okay. I want you to imagine that we are there in Shushan Habira, and that you do not know the story. We're actually there at the moment, okay? Now, we're all gathered around here, and you are the representatives of the various communities in the Golis in Persia, or that we are in. So the various towns, Mashhad and all these places. So I've got you here today, gentlemen. Do you mind if I'm the president of the... okay, I'm the president. I've got you here today because we have been invited to a party which His Majesty is throwing to celebrate the third year of his reign. So the question is, should we send representatives? All the nations of the empire have been invited, and I want to know whether or not we should go to the party or not. Pretend you don't know the story. It will be fun.
Kosher food.
Kosher food, yeah. Kosher food, yeah. Give me reasons for going to the party. Well, let's discuss it. Reasons for going to the party? Kosher food, right? Don't have to worry about
Party.
Loyalty.
it. We've got a party animal here, the representative from the party, the party. Yeah, okay, fine. Loyalty? Who said loyalty? Yeah, loyalty. It's very important, right? Loyalty. Between you and I, he's the sort of king who's got a temper that if his wife refused to turn up naked in front of his pals, I mean, that's the sort of guy he could be. Right? Sorry?
That's a party.
I would not know. Anyway, so basically, should we go to the party? So loyalty, yeah. In fact, isn't that, we get any rabbinic representatives here, isn't there a Torah idea about giving kavod to the melech? That's a derisa. We learned it out from Moshe Rabbeinu, who treated Paro with respect, even though he was killing Jews at the time. Right, so there's kavod melech, loyalty. The negative is not putting ourselves in danger. What if we don't turn up? Right? That's the sort of arguments. Any other arguments for going?
You gotta be happy. You have to be b'simcha. So.
Yeah, you missed last week's show. one of my Talmidim Yeshiva showed me in Vermachman Sefer where it says Miskadelius, it's not just a song, he actually wrote that. Anyway, I'm just a song as well. Okay, so any other reasons for going to the party? Oh, sorry, before we have the vote, I should tell you that I bumped into Rabbi Mordechai, great Rabbi Mordechai, and he said to me, I was coming here, he said to me, I believe you're discussing whether or not you should be going to this party. I said, yes, Rabbi. And he said to me, don't go. I said, why not? Don't go. I said, yes, but Rabbi, if you tell me why we shouldn't go, I'll discuss it with my delegates. Don't go. And he walked away. Now, I have to tell you, I mean, Rabbi Mordechai is a great rabbi, but of course we get great rabbis sitting around the table here, and other rabbis we've discussed this with. I don't see how this in any way changes the maskana, but it's only fair to have a vote. Pretend you don't know the story. What would you vote? So Rabbi Dessler says here that you and I and people greater than I would...
I remember when by Trump's inauguration, there was a guy who would not go. I thought it was chutzpah. I did not go.
Yeah, and it's a problem. I mean, we're halachically bound. I gave a shir.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but like the guy invites you to an inauguration.
Yeah, absolutely. I would give a shir in Queens at the time. I think I told you in 2016 they wanted me to give a shir in Beis Gabriel, and it was on the subject. The guy said to me, "Could you make it a controversial topic?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I said the presidential election. ... Bring in the clowns. So we discussed, from a Torah point of view, whether the accusations laid against, criticisms made against the three candidates, Bernie Sanders and so on, were valid. From a Torah point of view, that was what the whole thing was. Of course, you can't say that now. Even if you think that Donald Trump is the greatest disaster the world has ever seen, and I would point out that his mother is Scottish, so at least 50% of it is fabulous. But even if you were to say so, or to think so, as a Torah Jew, you couldn't say that. Because we've got to be, he's the head of state, and you have to be loyal to the state, so that you've got to be allowed to you have to vote for him, but fine. So we vote to go to the party, right? We have a meeting the next month, we're discussing how it went, everybody agrees that it went particularly well. The king was extremely pleased to see us. Oh, he said, look, the Jew boys are here. And nobody got drunk. And nobody ate anything treif. And it all went, as they say in Persian, hunky-dory. Okay, fine. What
about the Clan Mikdash?
Greg. I'm coming back to the Clan Mikdash shortly.
There was a little priestess there also.
Yeah, there was a little priestess there. Yeah. No, I believe that. Rabbi Dessa says that because the Shita didn't get drunk. Anyway, Greg. Get to this. So we come back, we congratulate ourselves, the ones who said that we shouldn't go, they're looking silly, fine. Then, 9 years later, I have you back here for an emergency meeting, an emergency session, to discuss the fact that you all know that the king has just appointed a new prime minister. His name is Adolf Haman, right? And we all know he's a profound anti-Semite. So I want you to consider what tactics or stratagem, should we employ to deal with an anti-Semitic prime minister. And of course, incidentally, I used to say this is something that Cloud Storms had to face hundreds of times in our history, but being British, and with the possibility of somebody called Jeremy Corbyn becoming the prime minister in the UK, that's something that touches my kids and my family now. How do you deal with the fact? Profound anti-Semite. What do you do if we're there? What are we going to do about the fact that Haman is been appointed prime minister? We know he hates our guts. What tactic should we apply? God, not again. I give in. Oh, this is not my night. Oh. As King Arthur said. Did you get that? It's just anti-Semitic. No, what would you say? What would you do if you get somebody in charge?
Well, obviously Mordechai was wrong the first time.
Sorry?
Obviously Mordechai was wrong the first time, so we're...
Sorry? Oh, so that makes sense. Let's maybe a bit of bribery, maybe a bit of flattery, right? It's interesting because Hitler is a Gilgal of Haman, if not literally, but certainly spiritually. I'm not sure if you could go up to Hitler and say, here, we bought you a new car. Yeah, okay, but we could try that. Anything else?
There's two ways, either to go with them or to go against them.
How can you go against them?
You see that in Israel they have two groups. One group goes against the government and one group goes with them. The question is...
It's a bit different here. What caused Kristallnacht?
The guy who got shot.
What guy got shot?
Of course, because Michael was a planned event.
Yeah. Well, what happened was there was a Jewish fellow, a young Jewish man, Greenspan, who assassinated the German ambassador to France. That was the excuse, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And Kristallnacht was provoked by that, right? So when you're in Golis, and it's not, bazaar or whatever it is,
That was a ticking time.
what can you do?
Could've
Yeah, of course. But what do we do? So certainly you could try flattering him. Certainly keep our heads down. I would say don't provoke, right? Do not provoke him. Does that make sense? Don't give him an excuse. Second there?
Baruch Ben Uriah said,
Okay. I'll get you back here a month later because these posters have gone up all over the empire. You see, what happens is, as you remember, straight after we came to that decision not to provoke him, then he passed a piece of legislation saying that everybody had to bow down to him because he's the prime minister. And everybody were keeping our heads down, we're not provoking him. But remember Rabbi Mordechai? Rabbi Mordechai was not only provoking him, he was waiting outside his front door in order to provoke him. Right? Everybody else is falling down, he's going, hi. Right? In your face, I think is the American phrase. So I phoned him up at the time, because we had phones in those days. I phoned him up and I said, Rabbi Mordechai, what on earth are you doing? We all voted to keep our heads down, not provoke him. Yeah. Again, no answer. Remember from 9 years ago? Mr. No Answer Rabbi Mordechai. No answer whatsoever. I said, perhaps you'd like to go to Florida, visit your cousins? Go away? No. And he keeps on doing it. Hardly surprising then that these posters are going to all around the empire that in a few months' time all the Jews on a certain day are going to be taken out and Yiskadav Yiskadashed. Whose fault is it? Mordechai's fault. Don't you agree? And if I told you a week later, our weekly meetings or monthly meetings, that I got a text, I got a tweet from Rabbi Mordechai, said, this is what you should do. You should fill the shuls, and you should daven, and you should fast, and wear sackcloth. I said to him, you're telling us how to get out of the mess. You got us in the mess! Thank you, but no thank you. But of course, in actual fact, what happens is that when Mordechai tells them what to do, then Taka, they do what he says they should do, and the plan to kill the Jews is complete. Everything goes in reverse. Then we could still ask the question, I think it's a valid question, why didn't he tell us why we shouldn't go to the party, which, as you said before, had the caning of the base of Mikdash? Why did he celebrate the third year of his reign? Why not the second, the first, the fifth? It was in order to celebrate the calculations they had made
70.
the 70 years, because the problem was that our Nevi'im had said, because you see, in the ancient world, when two nations went to war against each other, as you can find this in Torah, they believed not only were their soldiers and their generals fighting against each other, their weapons against the other guy's weapons, but also they believed their gods were fighting against the other guy's gods. If you lost, D-U-H, it's your own fault for worshipping your second-class gods in the first place. The Romans had better gods. Why weren't you worshipping Jupiter in the first place? And that's why when they were conquered by somebody else, immediately the victors, or rather the losers, went over to the victors' gods. But the Jews didn't do that. And the reason was because our Nevi'im had said, you're going to lose. Our Hashem had said, you're going to lose. And that you go back after 70 years. After 70 years was up in the third years, according to their calculation, the third year of Achashverosh's reign, that was the party to celebrate. That's what that was all about. But why did Mordechai tell us? Why did Mordechai tell us why we shouldn't go to the party? And of course he told us we wouldn't have gone to the party. Well, what was wrong with Klal Yisrael that needed a remedy? Suppose you find a lump, God forbid, but it's a completely benign lump. Or rather, let's say somebody finds a lump under their arm. It's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a completely curable form of cancer. Completely curable. But it's going to need surgery, it's going to need chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and all the stuff. But it's on the United Nations, World Health Organization book of curable diseases. And suppose you go and see me and I'm a really good doctor, right? I've done my stuff and I know what I'm seeing. And I look at it and I go, thinks, thought bubble, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. I say to you, if I were you, I would take an aspirin every morning for 6 months and come back and see me and see how it's doing. What would you think of me as a doctor? You're not going to get to 6 months. What are you going to say to me, in your 5th month or your 4th month when you're dying? Right? He told you aspirin, says the other doctor. What would you think of me? If Mordechai is able to diagnose that the problem with Klal Yisrael is that they don't listen to their Chachomim. If there's a problem that we're no longer listening to our Chachomim, as we said, which is the Yesod of Klal Yisrael, then he has to give us a reason for not going to the party that doesn't make sense, so that if we don't go to the party, it's because he told us to. But if he tells us the reason why we shouldn't go, and as you said, there's 1,000 reasons for not going, then of course we'll not go to the party. But why are we not going to the party? Because it makes sense to us, not because the God Ladoris told us not to say so. Would you have connected the two events 9 years apart as Rabbi Dessler? The promotion of Haman to Prime Minister, and the thing that sparked the whole process from the party from 9 years before in the 3rd year of the reign, would you connect those two? But Mordechai knew that. We didn't see that. Chachamim see things that we don't see. But if we're only going to do stuff because it makes sense to us, if the rabbi is telling to do, I said when my Rav told me to, in my life many times to do things, it made no sense to me. But Emunas Chachomim is doing it even if it doesn't make sense to you. Because you're only doing stuff that makes sense. There's no point in going to see the Chacham in the first place. So Rashi says you go to the Chachamim that are in your days. Does that mean they're never going to make mistakes? That's not a position we take. Edim Zalma means a proof that a base team, Shaif team, and Chachamim can make mistakes. But compared to any other alternative system that I can conceive of in the world, there is logically there's nowhere else to go except to the Chachamim. Because Rashi says, where else? Previous Chachamim, they're gone. Non-Jewish judges, non-Jewish ethics, non-Jewish morals, your own judgment? Duh! The worst possible person to give you advice is yourself. But as our Gedanim and as our Chachamim, by definition, people of, what's the point of learning Gemara? What's the point of learning Torah? To become a living Torah. Why do we stand up with a Chacham when he comes into a room, a Talmud Chacham? Not because he's got an ego problem. We're standing up for the Torah, just like we stand up for a Sefer Torah. He's absorbed it, it's become part of him. So therefore we're standing up to give cover to the Torah. He sees things from a Torah cook, from a Torah perspective. Then it makes sense to listen. It doesn't always make sense to me. I can't understand why he would say that. But we didn't understand why he would say it then and then didn't do it, and we nearly lost Klal Yisrael. But if I was the Sultan and I wanted to destroy Klal Yisrael, I would get them to no longer believe in their Chachamim. When we don't believe in our Chachamim,